Welcome to Foodie Time. I'm Jay Fedigan, and in this episode, well, it's a real treat. I got to talk with the celebrated poet Charles Coe, who shares wonderful stories about holiday meals growing up and the path he took to become a poet and so much more. I hope you enjoy this episode. This is part one. Part two of Charles Coe is coming up next week. Enjoy. Charles, thank you so much for being on Foodie Time. Could we start maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself? A little background would be helpful.
Sure. I was uh, I was born in the Russian forest, and I was raised by wild albino wolves. I graduated the Sorbonne at 12 with a double major in Byzantine poetry and mobile home management.
Well, that just about covers it, I think.
That's about covered it. Well, the less interesting response is that I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana,
Mhm.
and uh, I I was a musician in my earlier life. I still do music, but that's what I was focused on early. And I was in a rock band in Nashville in the early '70s, and I spent some time down there, and then I moved up to the East Coast in the mid '70s, and I've been in Boston since '75. I thought it was maybe a temporary experiment, but
Mhm.
here I am, like 642 years later.
What did you play? What was your instrument in the rock band?
I was the lead singer.
Wow.
I was the lead singer, and I played acoustic guitar and percussion. But and after I left the band and when I moved up to the East Coast, I was doing a solo act for a while. Have acoustic guitar will travel. The coffee shops in college concerts, and I would go to Long Island and to New Jersey and go up to New York City and do a bunch of stuff there. And it was a very exciting time. You know, I was a young guy and I was just footloose and fancy free and doing my music. It was a hoot.
That's great. Now, did you write your own material? Was that
I did.
we should say that you're a celebrated poet and author. I should make sure and say that. Did that start your love of poetry and writing, or did you do it your whole life?
Well, when I was in high school, I did a lot of music. I was the bass player in a rock band.
Uh,
And we did dances and so forth. And I also played stand-up bass in the school orchestra. Do you remember public school having music
yes,
programs,
I
and
do.
public schools had orchestras and choruses?
Yes.
So I played stand-up bass, I played classical bass, and then later on I kind of got more focused on the rock thing, and so
Mhm.
I was in a group in high school, and the band name was the Quadratic Soul Matrix.
Quadratic soul matrix.
Yeah.
That's very of the era, that's for sure.
Yeah. And it was so much fun. That's what I was doing back then. I was in high school. We were playing in this band, uh, and in subsequent years, I was doing a lot of work in like GB bands, general business bands, doing
Covers.
weddings and so forth. And I was not enjoying the music business from the position I had in it.
Hmm.
And I started sort of veering in more into writing, more into poetry. I'd written poetry in high school,
Hmm.
but it was the kind of stuff that hopefully will never see the light of day, that kind of earnest high school. It's good to do that,
Right.
but it's funny. I had an experience. This was in the late '90s. I I was going out with a friend to see a movie, and I was waiting for her to get ready and kind of hanging out in the living room and taking a peek at her books.
Hmm.
And there was an anthology of poetry, and I just pulled one book that book off and flipped through it, and it kind of opened to this Robert Frost poem
Hmm.
called "Acquainted with the Night."
Hmm.
Are you familiar with that poem?
I'm not.
Sorry, Robert, I'm fixing to butcher it, but basically it was like, I am one acquainted with the night. I have gone out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city lights. I have walked past the watchman and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. And when a distant call from another street came, not to call me back or to say hello, and I have seen at an unearthly height a single solitary clock against the sky proclaim the time was neither wrong nor right. I am one acquainted with the night. I kind of butchered that a little bit, but that was the poem. And I was going through some stuff in my own life. I'll spare you all the details.
Hmm.
But this the shock of recognition,
Hmm.
and I said, this, I want to do this. I want to write poetry. I want to do this.
Yeah.
And I had no fantasy that I could be a Robert Frost in any way.
Hmm.
That wasn't the point. The point was to bring whatever honesty, whatever authenticity I could bring to the the task of communicating with people through poetry. That was the point. And if somebody thought it was great, if somebody thought it was not great, I didn't care.
Right.
So that's when I started writing poetry as an adult,
Hmm.
you know, after the sort of excessively earnest high school poetry I'd written.
Hmm.
And that's what got me started. That's what got me going.
And poetry seems to me, at least, is an intensely personal form of writing. I know some poets, um, and everybody seems to have their own individual style and their own individual voice. It seems even more so with poetry than prose. Do you is that something that you find too?
They're all different kinds of poetry. Uh, there's very highly intellectualized poetry.
Mm-hmm.
There's there are poets who focus on doing spoken word, and they're not really interested in page poetry,
Mm-hmm.
as they said. Uh, and I hear all that, and I'm saying go forth and multiply. But my approach to poetry is I'm a storyteller, and the stories that I tell are of interest to some people, and not of interest to others. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
You know, years ago I was moderating this panel on writing, and someone put her hand up during the Q&A and said, basically, her question was, how can I figure out a way to write something that everybody will like? And I said, well, if you want to write something that everybody will like, you should probably stick to writing checks. If you send me a check, um, I will love it. I will take the check out and I will look lovingly at your signature and the amount of money that you filled in, and I'll maybe put it on my bulletin board for a minute or two to sort of admire it, and then I'll put it on my kitchen table and I have a cup of coffee, and then I'll take it to the bank,
Yeah.
and I will have very warm feelings about you.
My my brother was a poet for his entire life, and sadly he's no longer with us. And he led a difficult life, but his poetry turned out to be an outlet. He was a very angry individual, and his poetry is difficult to read. I mean, because it's angry, and it's, and it's hard to read. But but that was his voice. I mean, that, I have other people that I know, and their poetry is very flowery and light and fun, and that's who they are. And it seems that it's really an individual expression, because most people, it seems, write poetry for themselves.
You are your first audience, and
Mm-hmm.
if you're not satisfied with the work, if you don't feel that there was something authentic that you brought forth, then what the heck? First thing is, I'm sorry about your brother.
Thank
You
you.
have my condolences. It's very difficult. I mean, I lost my sister some years ago,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
my only sibling,
Yeah.
and it is very difficult to watch people you love suffer
Mm-hmm.
and make bad decisions sometimes
Yeah.
that contribute to the difficulties they're having. But uh, but you can only do so much. You can let people know that you love them and
Mm-hmm.
you support them,
Yeah.
but you can't walk their path for them.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I felt very fortunate that, at least in the last decade or so of his life, as he started to get himself settled down, we were able to actually establish a relationship that he's 7 years older than me, so we never had much of a relationship growing up, of course. But we were able to establish and have a nice relationship that I don't think that we'd had our whole lives. So I consider myself lucky in that way.
Right. My sister uh, died of liver cancer about 10 years ago.
Mm.
And our relationship was complicated.
Yeah.
And now I look back with my 71-year-old perspective, and there are only 800 or maybe 900 things that I had wished I had done different with her and with my mother and father, who are also, of course, both gone now that
Mm-hmm.
I'm a 71-year-old guy.
Yeah.
And it's easy to become a master of regret.
Mm-hmm.
Look back on your relationships with family and friends from back in the day, and that's, man, you sometimes when you got to wake up in the middle of the night to go do that thing that guys our age have to do.
Yes. Hopefully, it's a short walk. That's
It's a short walk, hopefully. And you're looking in that mirror for a minute in the bathroom, and then you go back to bed, and in the meantime, sleep has kind of crawled over to the window and jumped out and is padding barefoot through the grass to someplace else.
Mhm.
And you're lying there and you're just thinking about, and you look back on your younger years and you just go, what the bleep was I thinking?
Mhm.
Where was I?
Yeah.
Where was I?
Mhm.
And there's often a lot. I think there's a lot of grief associated with those
Mhm.
thoughts. You're thinking, wow, I could have helped so and so if I hadn't been focused so much on my own stuff.
Mhm.
I could have helped my sister. I could have helped my parents. I was out here doing my thing.
Right. Right.
And but uh, but the thing is, you can't go back. You can't go back. The
No,
only thing you can do is to be present to what's happening now in your
mm,
life and to see the people that you care about now and how can you help them now? How can you make different choices and take different approaches to being in a relationship now?
right.
You can't go back. I mean, what how can you how can you leave the campground cleaner than you found it now?
Yep. No, and grief and its close cousin regret are things that I believe that you never get over. And I don't know that I would want to ever lose it because it's part of it's an expression of love in my mind.
Yeah, I hear you. I read some research that shows that indicated that parts of the brain that are integral to making to judgment and situational assessment, those physical structures of the brain don't develop until your mid 20s or even a little later in some cases.
That's right.
So when I look back on all the knucklehead stuff I did when I was, you know, in my teens and my early 20s,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking maybe my brain it was still developing. And I look around at the other young people in my life who I see doing dumb stuff, and I'm thinking they're 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 still kids.
Yeah. Well, I'm an older dad, and I've got two 17-year-old twin boys, and
Wow.
my wife keeps trying to, because they're 17-year-old boys, they make their fair share of mistakes and errors, and I say, look, we can try our best, we can give them whatever guidance we can give them, but you know, when it really gets down to it, they sometimes just have to make their own mistakes. Sometimes the best lesson comes from making the mistake yourself, not learning from somebody else.
So true. What is it? I heard someone say that good judgment is based on experience, and experience is based on bad judgments that you made earlier in life. That it is hoped,
Hmm.
survived, and learned from.
Yeah. So, uh, so food. I know that food is important to you, and food shows up in your writing and in your poetries. Uh, and I love the one about your father learning to cook, which is a wonderful poem. And then he ended up he was a cook in the army. What was he?
He was a mess sergeant in the army. Yeah.
Wow. And to come from throwing the tomatoes to learning how to cook with them, I thought was it's a terrific story. And could you talk about your father, your family, and cooking?
Sure, 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 sure. Well, um, my father, his mother died when he was 14.
Mm,
And so, but his father was never really a factor in his life. It's a common story.
mm,
I don't even need to go into it.
yeah.
But after his mother died, he went to live with his mother's mother, his grandmother, and it was a house filled with women. And as the man, he was expected to contribute to the household.
Mm-hmm. Mm,
So he would go to a high school and he would kind of nod off in class, and the teacher would keep him behind, and dad would explain that he was working in a restaurant. He had been working in a restaurant until 2 o'clock in the morning,
mm, mm-hmm.
and he learned how to cook because there was a poem in one of my books you might have seen where when he acted out a little bit or got in a little trouble in the neighborhood, his mother would keep him in the house, and he'd be sitting in the kitchen watching her cook.
Yeah.
And they got curious about stuff, and so one thing led to another, and he got kind of into cooking. And uh, when he when he was drafted during the Korean War, he went
Hmm.
down and sent down to El Paso.
Hmm.
He was there maybe a few days, and they were in this lecture room, and getting ready for the next round of BS. And this non-commissioned officer, this corporal, ran into the lecture room and said, "Can any of you assholes cook?" and, and my father, innocent lamb he was, unaware of that the first law of the common soldier since the time of Hannibal, don't volunteer for nothing. He
Yeah.
put his hand up, and so he got hustled over to the mess hall, and a bunch of people had just gotten onto base. It was chaos, and two of the mess workers were out sick with dysentery. They'd eaten something out of a pan that hadn't been cleaned right.
Oh no.
And so the mess sergeant just pointed to a workstation and told my father, just go do that. And after the lunch and the cleanup, the mess sergeant popped down and said, "What's your name, soldier?" And my father told him, and he said, "Well, uh, I got a question for you. When you finish basic, would you rather get on the buses to go to the ships to ship off to Korea, or
Hmm.
would you like to stay here in El Paso making omelets for officers?"
Wow.
And that's what happened.
That's great.
So that my father uh, stayed in El Paso, and I became a mess sergeant eventually, and and he did all the weekend and holiday cooking in the family. My
Hmm.
mother cooked because you're a mother and you got to cook, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But my father loved cooking, and my mother had some things that some moves she did that I enjoyed. But
Hmm.
my father was the one who really handled the cooking in the house. I mean, he really loved doing the cooking. And there's a poem in one of my books, All Sins Forgiven, Poems for My Parents,
Hmm.
that's about my father's ritual for the Thanksgiving feast. And he was like he was down the rabbit hole with it. And so because of him, uh, I love to cook.
Hmm.
And I cooked professionally for some years.
Hmm.
Uh, and I love to cook. I don't do it for a living anymore, obviously, but I love doing it. And I'm working on a memoir. I've been working on it for the last few years about my family that focuses on my late sister Carol, bless her heart. But the 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 through line is food,
Hmm.
and it's called Room at the Table.
Nice.
And it looks at all these situations around my family and food. And I was working on something a little earlier this week. I was having lunch in this Vietnamese restaurant that I like
Hmm.
in Dorchester. If you don't know the Vietnamese community in Dorchester, is something that you really need to check out because it's fabulous places. So I was in my favorite place there called Pho Hoa, HOA, a little shout to them. I was sitting there by myself and having my lunch, and this young Asian couple comes in, and a young man, young woman, they sit and they get their food, and the server brings this gigantic bowl of pho and sets it down in front of the woman.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, that's got to be a mistake. That's too big. But she goes through this thing like Sherman's March to the Sea, and she's like tipping the bowl at the end. So you get the last bit of broth. And I'm thinking that's Carol. That's my sister.
Yeah.
Carol, she was about the same size.
Hmm.
She was no bigger than a minute. And my sister had a ginormous appetite. One
Hmm.
time I was watching her put away a load of pups, meatloaf and mashed potatoes.
Hmm.
And I said, Carol, you eat like a bird, which is to say a quarter of your body weight every day.
That's
She's
great.
kind of
Yeah.
you gotta yeah, like right, whatever. And she's like, you just like going for it. So food, you think about food and memory. I have I go to a Thanksgiving potluck, a Friendsgiving with some friends who are
Hmm.
all really fabulous cooks. Some of them have cooked professionally.
Hmm.
And one of the friends brings the cranberry relish
Hmm.
that is extraordinary. It's got the orange zest and the walnuts
Hmm.
and I love it. It's delicious. But there's a part of my lizard brain that's thinking about the stuff in the can with the ridges.
Right.
You know,
That you grew up with.
that we all of us of a certain age grew up with.
Yeah.
And I'm wishing I could have a little of that too. You know?
That's, I still fondly remember, TV dinners, those, I used to love the turkey and potatoes and yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My parents, some parents say, well, you have to eat such and such.
Mhm.
My parents never did that with my sister Carol and me, but they loved liver and onions.
Mhm.
I hated
I'm
liver and
there.
onions.
Yeah.
Carol hated liver and onions.
Hmm.
So my parents would have liver and onions, and they would tell Carolyn and me, well, you can have some leftovers, or you can pull some TV dinners out of the freezer. And so Carol and I would be sitting in the living room watching the Ed Sullivan Show or whatever
Yep.
with our little TV trays. You remember those aluminum folded
Yep, I
TV
do.
trays? And we would have our Swanson turkey TV dinners on our little trays.
Yep.
And, and our parents would be in the kitchen sitting at the table having their liver and onions.
Hmm.
And that was just, I loved it. I loved it. The fact that they they didn't say that they didn't deny themselves. They
Hmm.
neither denied themselves what they enjoyed,
Yeah.
nor forced Carol and me to eat something we didn't like.
Hmm.
It just makes too much sense
Yeah.
the way they handled it. Alcohol was another thing. Uh, I had friends in high school who would pay some street guy to go into a liquor store and buy them stuff and get, shit faced on it. But in our home, my mother drank well, almost never.
Hmm.
Father would pick up a six pack and it might last for a weekend or a
Hmm.
week.
Hmm.
And on Friday night, when we were watching Twilight Zone or whatever,
Yep.
if Carol and I wanted to split a beer, fine.
Hmm.
So alcohol was neither abused nor forbidden
Hmm.
in our home, which to me is a really good model. So when I went away to college and I saw the guys who were like acting out and getting blasted, I didn't have any I didn't have any need to do that. There was no pent up energy that I needed to release.
Yeah.
And in fact, this is it's a little bit of a tangent, but this is a funny. I think it's a funny story. In the winter of 1971,
Hmm.
the band Traffic was on tour,
Oh, yeah.
and they had a gig scheduled for Dayton, but the promoter, their money fell through,
Hmm.
and the gig fell through. And someone, I this was 100 years before the internet.
Right.
Someone at Earlham found out about this and got in touch with Traffic's people and said, "We know this date fell through. We're 40 miles away from where you were going to play.
Hmm.
We can't offer you what you were going to get there. We can offer you this.
Hmm.
So rather than just having a blank night on your schedule, why don't you think about coming here?" And so Traffic came to Earlham College, 800 students on campus,
Wow.
in the auditorium, and Steve Winwood came out, and it was obvious that he was thinking this was a purgatory-like experience. Here we are in clusterfuck, Indiana, pardon my,
Yeah.
and but we were so into it that they got into it, and it became like a club date, and
Yeah.
it was a fantastic night. And after two encores,
Hmm.
Steve said, "Wow, well, we're tired and we got to go home, but we've had a really great time. Maybe we'll come back again sometime." And you know that was never going to happen
Right.
as far as a straight up booking, but it was very gracious of him to say that.
That's
And it was a singular experience, being in an auditorium with maybe 400 wildly enthusiastic kids in traffic at the height of their
oh,
power.
oh, I know. The 1971. I don't think that there was a better time to see Traffic.
No,
It was that
no, it
low
was
spark of
incredible.
high-heeled boys that was that
Yeah, exactly.
that's
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, with Jim Capaldi and
mhm,
Chris Wood and
yeah.
all these other people, and it was like, it's one of those things that you never forget. Oh, but you were talking about food before, and I
Yes.
wanted to get
Yeah,
I
we should
wanted
get it is a food show.
it is a
But
food
you know
show.
what? It's a food and everything and anything else we want to talk about is the way I
Right.
look
Well,
at it.
we're all over the map, but
Yeah.
that's a good thing. But I love Anthony Bourdain's writing,
Yes.
and uh, he wrote this one essay when he and his family were traveling in France when he was a kid, and his older brother and his parents were there, and they were on this little boat, and the guy who ran the boat was pulling up some oysters,
Hmm.
and this guy offered Bourdain an oyster,
Hmm.
and nobody else in the family wanted to sort of eat this raw oyster.
Right.
And Bourdain slurped it down and had a revelation.
Mm. Mm.
And he describes it's very underplayed, it's very low key, but the guy who was running the boat and Bourdain had this connection,
Hmm.
and the guy realized that this was a moment for Bourdain, and that sort of shock of recognition
Hmm.
when you realize that you've just had an experience with food that's
Right.
imprinted on you. Uh, Bourdain also wrote about the last meal game
Mm. No, I know.
that chefs play sometimes. These
Oh,
you know
yes.
these high level chefs. What would be your last meal?
Right.
And it's never the tasting menu at the French Laundry.
Right.
It's
Yes.
always your mother's marinara,
Yeah.
your mother's meatloaf.
Yeah. Something that you could never get again. Usually,
Yeah.
it's the you can try and recreate. I my grandparents, as I said, were Italian and they were terrific cooks and they cooked as a couple all the time. Although they sadly didn't get along. There were, um,
Uh,
it was old Italian prearranged marriage kind of a deal. But they always got along in the kitchen and cooking and I used to love to hang out in the kitchen when they were cooking and they had a large all I can think of now. So they had like a kitchen with the refrigerator and the stove and the table in it. And then there was a room that was twice the size of the kitchen, off the kitchen, that had all the prep tables and all the ingredients. And it was almost like a restaurant in that way. And they had, the meat grinder where they made the sausage and the whole
Right.
the whole works. And I used to love to watch them cook. And I would say that my mother was not a terribly good cook. So I'd say everything that I learned or I just sort of absorbed. I mean, I can remember not even being as tall as the counter, and they would ask me to hand them stuff and show me how things were made. And um, it was a terrific experience. And I try and make food like they made it again, just to rekindle those fond memories.
Right.
Um, but whatever I do is a poor example of what they could
Well,
do.
what is it they say? The perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah, exactly.
My mother, when somebody cooked something for my mother that they didn't think was up to some imaginary standard they have,
Hmm.
my mother's response was, "Well, there's nothing wrong with it. Eating won't cure."
That's great.
And when people who know that I have years of professional restaurant experience
Right.
think about asking me over to dinner, they say, "Well, we'd like to have you over for dinner, but you're such a good cook. We can't cook for you." I said, "Yes, you can.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you want me to bring? You want me to
Yeah.
bring some wine? You want me to bring a 6-pack, a 12-pack? You just let me know. I'll be there. Whatever you make, I'll eat it, and we'll enjoy it."
Hmm.
Because I don't think that there's anything more. And this is kind of corny. I'm going to use the word holy.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
don't think there's anything more holy than bringing somebody into your home
Hmm.
and giving them food that you prepared with your own hands
Hmm.
out of love.
Right. No, that's nothing corny about that. I always consider myself very fortunate that I know how to cook, and I love to have people come over, and it's always a high point for me to have people enjoy the food that I've cooked or help me in the kitchen to get things ready. So. Um, uh, when you were growing up, did you have favorite meals or memorable times? When you talked about Thanksgiving, was there something that did you have any seminal moments or really memorable times?
It would be my father's Thanksgiving dinner,
Hmm. Yeah.
which took like 3 days to prepare. It was a whole process of getting the turkey when there were always frozen turkeys back in Indiana.
Yeah.
Back in the day, you get the turkey and put it in the fridge and let it defrost slowly, and then he'd make a big tray of cornbread
Hmm.
and crumble it up into a pan and cube Wonder Bread
Yeah.
and minced onion and all the spices and let that kind of chill out. And I mean, it was the whole thing. Uh, my father's Thanksgiving dinner was like the invasion at Normandy. It was a very sophisticated military operation. So that would be my number one thing, and my number two thing would be, well, a couple of years ago, I went with a friend to a nice bistro here in Cambridge, Massachusetts,
Hmm.
and we had an artisanal um, grilled cheese sandwich on really fancy bread with fancy cheese, and it was um, smoked heirloom tomato soup, and it was delicious,
Hmm.
delicious. But just like with the cranberry sauce, I was thinking, what I'd really like right now is the Kraft slices on Wonder Bread with a thin smear of earthquake alert yellow mustard, the French's mustard,
Yeah.
some Campbell's cream of tomato soup,
Yeah.
that when I was a kid on a snow day, you didn't
Right.
go to school and you played in the snow like all morning, and you came in and you were completely crusted with snow, and
Right.
your mother had to pull out the jaws of life to get you out of your coat, right?
Yeah.
And then you sit at the kitchen table with a bowl of Campbell's cream of tomato soup
Hmm.
and a grilled cheese sandwich, Wonder Bread, Kraft cheese slices, a little mustard,
Yeah.
and then you put that away and you grab a rack of the Nabisco graham crackers
Hmm.
and a glass of cold milk, and you
Oh,
you dunk your graham crackers in the milk just for the right amount of time so that they were they got the vibe of the milk,
right.
but not too long so they fell apart in the milk.
Yeah.
But if some fell apart in the milk, you drank the milk and then you had this little slurry of the desiccated graham crackers at the bottom of the glass, and you did
Oh,
those too.
a little bonus at the
A little bit.
end.
Exactly.
Oh, no, that's I have exactly the same memory. I'm sure it must be somewhat due to the fact that we're about the same age. It's,
Right.
I don't know
It's
the
all
people
good.
because I mean, my kids have grown up on artisanal bread and nice cheese. When I make them a toasted cheese sandwich for lunch, it's it isn't the same. It's not. We haven't even tasted Wonder Bread for probably 30 years.
They don't even know the Wonder Bread exists.
Exactly, exactly, because it's
I mean, I haven't bought Wonder Bread or anything like it in 120 years, but I still have very fond memories of it. Back in Indianapolis, there was a Wonder Bread factory near our house.
oh God,
And
wow,
so when I would drive by it, you would smell.
yeah,
And I mean, the fact that Wonder Bread is not what one would call a high quality bread, uh,
right.
but you drive past this place and you smell this stuff baking, and
Hmm.
it was fabulous. And
Yeah.
it would still be fabulous. If I drove by a Wonder Bread factory, I'm sure there's some things like it somewhere, and I smelled that smell, I would be, that
Yeah.
smells
Well, I worked for a while in Technology Square in Cambridge, and there used to be the Necco factory was there. I don't know if you
right.
and
Oh yeah.
every day when I would walk to lunch or do stuff, you would just smell the Necco factory, and every time I go and get one of those things of dry wafers with the colors, the different
Right.
colored candies.
Right.
It reminds me of those days years ago, and just smelling there there is something about that
And objective quality is in a way, from the emotional standpoint, is irrelevant.
hmm
Proust talked about the Madeleines. I mean, everybody who is geeked out about food writing or
hmm
memoir,
right.
everybody knows about Proust and the Madeleines, right?
Yeah.
Which is fabulous. And everybody has their own memory of childhood.
Hmm.
And sometimes that food is not, quote, quality, unquote. Sometimes it's the grilled cheese sandwich on Wonder Bread with Kraft cheese slices.
Right.
But the thing that's important is your connection to it.
Hmm.
Your,
Hmm.
your, yeah. Uh, when I was a kid, fast food was a delight.
Hmm.
My parents were tired and didn't feel like cooking, and if Dad picked up a sack of White Castle hamburgers
Yeah.
or Kentucky Fried Chicken on his way home
Mm.
from work, and he came in with that stuff, my sister and I were over the moon.
Yeah.
And in objective terms, there is there's no it's not good food.
Right. Well, yes.
You know,
It's bad food, I think you could
it's
safely
bad
say.
food,
uh,
but it has it there's a connection to it that
mhm.
that cannot be denied.
Well, that's the end of part one of my interview with Charles Coe. His stories are great, and he's such a wonderful storyteller and such a wise person. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Stay tuned for part two of the interview with Charles Coe, which will be on Foodie Time next week.